At least 8 more witnesses are slated to testify before Congress next week as part of the impeachment inquiry into President Donald Trump. Once testimony concludes, the House Intelligence Committee will write a report summarizing their findings.
In December, the House is expected to draft articles of impeachment, and while the president will most likely be impeached in the House, it is very unlikely that the Senate is going to convict. So joining us with his thoughts on the process so far and what we can expect moving forward is journalist Aaron Maté. He's host of The Pushback Show. Aaron joins us now via Skype. Aaron, it's great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. So, we've obviously, I'm a fan of your work. I cited some of it yesterday, Aaron. I think you have one of the better perspectives on this entire thing. One of the things that I highlighted yesterday was that you were talking about how the underlying policy area of disagreement here is vitally important. So just tell us a little bit about that and your qualms with the process that's currently happening.
Yeah, I don't think you can separate the policy from what is happening, and I don't think we'd be having this massive scandal if not for the fact that this policy, once again, kind of like Russiagate, touches on the imperatives and the interests of the national security state, where, again, this scandal originates, just like Russiagate did. So you have this outrage that Trump briefly froze some military aid to Ukraine. And the prevailing narrative is that that endangered Ukraine in its fight against Russia, which there's a lot of fiction surrounding that, which we don't need to get into. But basically, in short, the U.S. actually helped set off the current proxy war in Ukraine with Russia. It's killed 13,000 people. We have a major responsibility for it. And what we should be doing is, instead of sending military aid to Ukraine, I think we should be ending it and trying to encourage Ukraine to make peace with Russia, which is exactly what the current Ukrainian President Zelensky ran on. And I think that this process reflects outrage amongst unelected bureaucrats that Trump briefly threatened the continuation of that proxy war. Not that that was Trump's motive. I do think that Trump got caught doing something shady here, and it's fine to hold him accountable for that. But to make this the center of an all-consuming impeachment process that sidelines a really exciting Democratic primary, I don't think you can. I think if you're going to evaluate, you have to evaluate both the consequences of it and also the drivers of it. And the drivers of it are not anything progressive, but in fact a very dangerous Cold War view that wants to encourage tensions with Russia.
Such an important point.
I think that's so well said.
Yeah.
And I think it's very hard for Democrats to separate, it's not okay to mess around with a political investigation into your potential political rival and to connect that to military aid isn't okay. You can say that, but also still say that of all the things that Trump has done, that this particular one, when the sacrosanct principle of military aid and the interests of the national security state suddenly come into play, that it's no coincidence that that's the thing that finally triggers impeachment.
Right.
I totally agree. I mean, there's so many things you could hold Trump to account for. I mean, I have a long list. He's imposing a crippling blockade on Venezuela that is depriving people of medicine and food, doing the same thing to Cuba, doing the same thing to Iran. He pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal. He's escalated bombings around the world. He's increased the cruelty against Central American migrants. I can go on forever about all the things that I think Trump could be impeached over. But it's interesting that the two top scandals that Democrats have latched onto originate with the national security state. And I think it's both dangerous for the world, and I don't think we should be encouraging Trump to escalate tensions with Russia. I think we should be encouraging Trump to make peace with Russia. It's also just, I think, bad electoral politics. I mean, how is this going to play in the battleground states where many actually voters got conned, I think, into believing that Trump was anti-interventionist and was going to drain the swamp? Well, instead of putting forward an alternative policy agenda that shows that to be a con, Democrats are actually giving it more fuel. Once again, his opponents are despised Beltway bureaucrats who are trying to take him down. And he can use that and say, look at these people trying to undo the will of the people, which was, I think, very much the case with Russiagate. So I think it's just a dangerous move all around.
Right. And Aaron, I think that's why, if you really do care about democratic norms, this is one of the most important things that you have to guard against, which is an all-powerful national security state with interests very contra to the will of the American people and trying to subvert that will by basically being at open war. I mean, I don't know how else you can describe members of the State Department, former ambassadors, and and others coming forward before the Congress, being in cahoots with the House Intelligence Committee chairman, and then testifying in an open effort, really, to take down a president.
I totally agree. I don't like Trump personally, and I don't like pretty much any of his policies. But I respect the fact that he was elected. He won enough votes to win in the right states under our unfair electoral college system. But he's still the president. And the strange thing about Russiagate and now Ukrainegate is that it cedes authority to unelected intelligence officials and bureaucrats to basically decide what the U.S. policy should be. The FBI even investigated Trump as a possible Russia agent. And among their worries that fueled this, according to the New York Times, was that Trump was saying nice things about Vladimir Putin on the campaign trail.
Right.
And it's crazy that we, especially as progressive liberals, have given unelected people such power, especially because, I mean, it's one thing to, I understand the fear about Trump now and the desire for a sense of a check on him. But these same powers that are being used against Trump now, there's no reason why, unless they're stopped, that they could be used against progressive candidates down the future. So what happens if, I don't know, Bernie Sanders says he wants to cut off military aid to Israel until it ends the occupation of Palestinians? Will he be investigated as a possible conspirator with, I don't know, Palestine or whatever? It's like, so it's not the role of unelected bureaucrats to shape the policy of an elected president, whether we like that president or not.
I think that's such an important point, and that kind of leads me into the media piece of this. I mean, you see John Brennan and these guys like celebrated as heroes in quote unquote liberal media. What is going on there? What is happening?
It is so weird. So right now we have now a criminal inquiry overseen by Attorney General William Barr into the origins of the Russia investigation. And as the two major cable networks cover it, they're literally covering their employees. So we have John Brennan, who I think above all was the key intelligence official responsible for this, but he's now an analyst at MSNBC. Over on CNN, you have former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper. You have Andrew McCabe, a key official at the FBI behind the Russian investigation. You also have Jim Baker. Back at MSNBC, I forgot one, is none other than Andrew Weissman, who I think was really the key investigator of the Mueller probe. If you watch Mueller's testimony back in July, it showed that Mueller was kind of out to lunch. So Andrew Weissman is now an analyst at NBC News, which makes it all the more impossible for these networks to cover this whole thing objectively, which they never did from the start. But it's just crazy. And returning to the Ukraine thing, I mean, if you listen to it, part of the shift in the Trump era has been to shift Democrats to the right into the Cold War views of these people, like the witnesses we saw on the first day of testimony. And that's reflected also in the fact that now on the liberal networks, their top analysts are the intelligence officials who in a normal time, they'd be skeptical of and critical of.
Yeah.
So, such a good point there, Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to have you back. Thanks again.
Thanks, Aaron. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Coming up, a Nevada poll asks if voters would rather go back to the Obama era or move on to something different. Has some pretty surprising results.
And if Senator Sanders becomes president, he says AOC is going to have a big place on his staff. More on that when Rising continues.